Hello, hello, could you hear me?
I sure can. How are you?
Good morning, Jerome. Dobro jutro. Kako ste? How is all?
Everything is fantastic. Good to speak with you again.
Good to speak to you. Thank you for coming to our show for this little chat.
Oh, it's my honor. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So, Jerome, let me start our this morning's get-together with how and where we met and why we met there. What was happening exactly that October 16 in Cleveland?
Well, it was the inaugural Croatian Sports Hall of Fame for North American athletes. The North American Croatian Sports Hall of Fame had its very first induction ceremony, and it was long overdue, first of all. And secondly, a spectacular evening. Not only did I get to meet people like yourself and so many other fellow Croatians, but we were able to honor 10 very, very important people who have had a great deal of success in their individual field of sport and brought a lot of pride not only to their families and their individual countries, but also to anyone with a Croatian background such as ourselves. So it was an honor to not only MC the event, but also be one of the people who voted on who should be inducted or not, one of the 15 men and women who were taking part in selecting the nominees and then narrowing it down to a final 10.
That is so true. Thank you. It was really an honor for us too to be there and to meeting everybody, you especially. So I'd like to continue a little bit about you, Jerome. So your story, your Croatian background, and please could you tell us a little bit about your Croatian roots?
Sure. All four of my grandparents emigrated to the United States from Croatia. My father's family is and still lives in a village named Oakley. It's about I don't know how many kilometers, but it took us about an hour and 45 minutes north of Split the first time that we visited because we didn't know where we were going. And we had been to Croatia, actually, my wife and I, 3 times in the last 7 years. And each time we go, we visit my relatives in Oakley. My grandfather and one of his brothers came to America, and the rest of his family stayed put. So the house that he was born in and his, what are now nieces and nephews and grandnieces and nephews, still reside in Oakley, and I have come to know them and have gotten to know them quite well. And it's just a great get-together whenever I come to visit. My mother's parents were from a village, Svete Martin. I know there's a large city named Svete Martin in North Croatia, but this one is about 40 minutes west of the Zagreb airport in the beautiful rolling hills of that area of the country. And they, of course, met there, and they both came to this little area of western Pennsylvania. Like so many people from all over Europe, when they came to America, they didn't necessarily know where to go or have relatives or someone who could take them in back then in the early 19th century. So they would congregate in areas of the United States where other people from their village or the village next door came. And fortunately for me, my mother's parents came to a small town in eastern Ohio named Hubbard, Ohio, and my father's grandparents came to a small little town named Sharon, Pennsylvania, and they're only 2 miles away from each other. And so many people from the church that I grew up in, St. Anthony's Croatian Catholic Church in Sharon, PA, had relatives who have done the same. They would come and they say the Jepinas moved to Faro, PA, or the Golubiches moved to Faro, PA, or the Jerenoviches moved. So they would go only because, first of all, they spoke the same language, and secondly, their relatives back in our homeland knew those families. So they knew that there would be somebody warm and accepting and from the same culture and had so much in common that there was always going to be a helping hand. And that's how a lot of communities in the United States, as you know, were formed back in the time. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience for me to grow up in that culture. I, as a child, didn't know what was happening. Now, as an adult, just through knowledge and research and living through that experience, I know. But back then, I just thought everybody was related to somebody who sat next to him in church, because that's just the way that it was. And, you know, my maternal grandfather was a little bit older than my maternal grandmother, but as is the case back in the day, you stayed within your own culture, and they had a large family. And my paternal grandparents, they had 3 children, my father, an uncle, and a aunt. And it was very refreshing to see how these families came together and then expanded, not only as Americans, but also in a pretty decent-sized Croatian American community.
Definitely. That's so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing this story of you and your family and your Croatian roots, how everybody came together. But I must remember here with actually one other very interesting story. It's actually the super interesting anecdote that you shared with us in Cleveland about how sometime by the start of your television career, the company you just started working for kind of gently asked you to please somehow change your Croatian last name. But what happened then, Jerome? I guess it's just the history happened at that very moment.
Well, I originally started my career back in Pennsylvania, and in Pennsylvania, it is a melting pot, much like New York City and a lot of the industrial Northeast, when people would come over to this country from all over Europe. So I grew up in a large community of Croatians, Romanians, Czechs, Italians, Irish, German. So it was not uncommon to have a name like Jerenovich. Mm-hmm. There, it was widely accepted. But after 4 years, I got a job at CNN in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. CNN, as you know, is a large international company. And at that time, it was serving mostly North America. It hadn't really ventured into the international aspect as much. So when they hired me, my boss said, look, congratulations on the job, but we think we're going to ask you to change your name. And I looked at him, and that was not uncommon in radio and television throughout the 50s and 60s and even part of the 70s, mm-hmm. where people with a long ethnic name were not necessarily accepted by audiences in the Midwest or the West. So they would change their name to Patrick or Jones or Smith or just something very common. Mm-hmm. And this was 1987. And I looked at him and I was very disappointed. And, you know, keep in mind, this is basically my first job interview with the company. So I didn't really have a lot of leverage. And I would have accepted changing my name to take that position because it was a pretty prestigious job, mm-hmm. CNN Sports Department.
Kind of a dream come true,
However,
right?
I looked at him and I was depressed. And I told my boss, I said, Bill, this is going to greatly disappoint my parents and depress them. Not just my parents, but I know everyone close to me, my family, my neighbors, people back home in my community in Western Pennsylvania. I said, you know, we're growing into an international company, and there are a lot of people around the world that have 3 vowels or more in their last name. And I did not know it at the time. Bill worked in New York City for decades. And I said, Bill, don't you remember how popular Jessica Savage was on NBC Nightly News? Mm-hmm. And little did I know that Bill had a crush on Jessica, and he loved Jessica Savage, and he thought, wow, Jessica Savage was really popular, mm-hmm. not only in New York, but throughout the country. Let's go ahead and let this young man keep his last name. And it turned out to be the best decision that he ever made, for me at least, because most of the guys I were working with were named Jones and McKay and Patrick and Smith, and all of a sudden, and Wright, and all of a sudden you have Jerenovich. It was so unique on CNN at the time. It was very distinguishable, and it led to a lifetime of instant recognition in the radio and television industry because nobody had a name
Absolutely.
as long as that, and just rolled off your tongue like Jurenovich. And my father's name is Jerome as well. So everybody says, "Oh, I love your name," and I said, "Well, I'll tell my father thank you," because he's the one that gave it to me. I take no credit for it.
And you made a real brand out of your last name, I would say. Could we please just ask you to say it one more time for us? The famous, line? I won't say it. You should.
Okay. Well, I need to set it up a little bit, and I'm happy to do it for you.
Okay.
For years, almost 15 years, when I worked at CNN, my sportscasts were off camera, which means you only saw highlights and scoreboards and my voice over them. So no one really saw what I looked like until the last couple of years when I was working on CNN International, when we were on TV like a normal television presenter. But for the first 14 or so, it was just my voice. And, it's a long name. So I had to come up with something that made it unique, and I literally had to fill a specific time slot. I had to say my name and CNN Headline Sports anywhere from 10 to 12 seconds. And 10 to 12 seconds to the average person seems like that's nothing. But as you would know, working in radio, it's actually a long time. You could say Jerome Jurenovich, CNN Headline Sports. You could say that in 4 seconds. But I had to fill 12. So I'm like, how could I do this? So I just came up with an idea of saying Jerome Jurenovich, CNN Headline Sports. And it took up 10 seconds. And the first time I did it, everybody in the newsroom and the television control room were laughing. And I thought to myself, if I could generate that type of response to these people, imagine what the people at home listening were thinking, because nobody ever said anything like that. Nobody. They would always say, Mark McKay, CNN Headline Sports.
You certainly gave me goosebumps now. This is so just, good.
I stumbled upon it. I'll be honest with you. I completely stumbled upon it. And it, as you mentioned, it just turned into a brand.
Exactly.
And it opened the door for me. When I left CNN, I got 4 other jobs, because when I applied for those jobs, the employers at the time knew exactly who I was.
Who you
and they
were.
couldn't wait to meet me and interview me.
So I'm going to continue exactly with that, what you just said, because being Croatian, how did your being Croatian or with your Croatian background actually connect to your career? Okay, you said a couple of things now, but did it influence somehow in some way, or how did you feel during your 40-year television career about being connected to Croatia?
Well, first of all, as I just mentioned, you staying with my actual name allowed me to differentiate myself from other sports presenters.
Perfect.
And then throughout the course of time, fortunately for all of us, we have had some tremendous success by Croatian athletes. So for someone like me on CNN, talking about the success and also the failures early in his career of Goran Ivanisevic, and then seeing him come back years later as a wild card and winning Wimbledon.
Absolutely.
Goran, as we all know, was one of the top tennis players in the world for years. And I don't want to say I would piggyback off of his name, but it allowed me to talk about Ivanisevic in a little more detail than I would a player such as Pete Sampras, who was so good. Everybody knew Pete Sampras, but a lot of viewers and listeners didn't really understand Ivanisevic. They didn't know a lot about him. So I would always put more emphasis on Ivanisevic. I would always mention he's from, the hard-serving Croatian. I would always mention Croatia whenever I spoke about a player such as that. And so even to this day, I just retired last fall. And I was also covering the NBA for the last 15 years. And the game announcer for the Atlanta Hawks, Bob Rathbun, who's one of the top 2 or 3 basketball announcers in America, in my opinion, he used to tease me all the time, because during the game, when a decent player from Croatia would do anything, Bojan Bogdanovic now with the Pistons, Ivica Zubac with the Clippers, I would always throw in there, if you need a big shot, you got to go to the Croatian. And Bob used to tease me on the air and say, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't learned this by now over the last 15 years, if there's a Croatian on the court, Jerome is going to tell us all about it.
You mean Jerome Jurenovich.
So it was not just a sense of pride for me, but it was another way of separating me from other announcers from other NBA teams, because I would always give a little extra love to the Croatian players while I was broadcasting. And my colleagues thought it was funny, but they also realized what I was doing. And on a side note, every time an NBA team came into Atlanta to play the Hawks, if they had a Croatian player, I would walk into the visiting locker room, and most of the guys kind of keep to themselves, and most athletes don't want to talk to the media anyway. And I understand that. That's just life. I would walk right up to the Croatian player, who was usually generally sitting by himself, because he'd be the only Croatian player.
He was waiting for you, Jerome.
No, and he had no idea. Most of them didn't know who I was the first time I did it. And I would walk right up to them and go, Dobar dan. And their eyes would light up. And I don't know. The biggest regret I have in my life is that I don't fully comprehend how to speak the Croatian language fluently. I know bits and pieces and phrases, but I'm working on that.
There's always time, time.
And they'd ask, where are you from? I'd ask, I would know where they're from already because I would research.
Of course.
But if I didn't, I would ask, and I told them, look, I just got back this July. I was there, and I was here, here, and here. And we would just talk. And boy, you could just tell they felt a genuine sense of warmth. That even though they didn't know me and they weren't going to see me again until next year, that it was just very nice for them because they're playing on the other side of the world.
Of course.
It was a piece of home to have that conversation with me. And they all greatly appreciated it. And I did as well. And it was an easy way for me to connect with them.
Exactly. Very good. I love this story. It's exactly what we wanted you to say and what our listeners, I'm sure, wanted to hear. But in this context, Jerome, I think we could say now is the moment we have been waiting for here. Well, I'd like to ask you about that 1996 in Atlanta. You met with the greatest of the greatest, I could say, and I'm talking about that basketball game. So where you met Kukoc, Raja, Vrankovic, Rimac, I don't know who else. So how was that for you? Did you tell them you were Croatian too?
Well, that was one of the highlights of my career. A year earlier, I had met, at the time, Ambassador Zuzul. So I had met him at a Croatian conference in Los Angeles, and he insisted the next year, when the Olympics were in my hometown of Atlanta now, where CNN is located, that they were going to have every country rents out an entire house, and they use it for marketing, public relations, to explain industry and everything that country offers, as well as an example of their culture. And he insisted that I swing by the house. And I said, absolutely, I would love to. And my brother had come into town to view a few Olympic events with me. And one day we just decided, hey, I promised the ambassador I'd swing by. Let's just see what it's all about. And we walked in, and it was absolutely fascinating. There were, young men and women in dressed professionally. There were other young people dressed in traditional Croatian garb. And, they were explaining exactly what they were presenting in the house. And they insisted that I come the next night for dinner. And I said, sure, okay. But they were very proud of the fact that they had a Croatian announcer on CNN. So now, keep in mind, this is 1996. This is a country we hadn't been around that long, correct?
Yep.
So I stopped by. I was so fascinated at what was going on there. I'll come to dinner tomorrow night. I show up at dinner the next night, and it was with the entire Croatian men's basketball team. So I'm sitting there with my man Dino Raja. Love Dino Raja. He was hilarious to speak with. Next to him was Kukoc, the whole team. It was fascinating. And then who comes in at the end of the dinner? And I'm sitting there having a glass of wine with Ivanisevic.
Oh,
and there were probably 8 or 9 other Olympic athletes from the country that had just popped in to say hello. Their events either weren't that day or they were earlier in the day, and they had stopped by. And it was really a spectacular evening, because you can talk to an athlete in a locker room before or after a game.
So great.
And that's their work. That's their job. But when you're sitting there at a casual dinner, enjoying good food and a good glass of wine, that's when you get to know the person,
yes,
not the athlete.
Correct.
And it was just a fabulous memory that it was spectacular. I owe it all that, Ambassador Zuzul, to getting me in there. And then once I walked in, oh my goodness, they treated me like I was a star, and I was simply just a sportscaster for CNN, but they were so proud of me. And what they didn't realize is I was 100 times more proud of each of them.
You know what,
so
Jerome?
Getting to know them was a lot of fun.
You don't need to be so modest about yourself, because we here, actually, everybody want to just thank you for being our Croatian ambassador in the sports world,
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I'm not so sure I'm a Croatian
that is
ambassador,
true.
But I will tell you this, and I'll
For
tell
us,
you
you were.
Anybody that knows me knows I have a tremendous sense of pride of my ethnic background. As a matter of fact, a side note on this story from the Olympics, I asked, I can't remember the gentleman's name, he was with Ambassador Zuzul, so I asked the ambassador who was having dinners with us that night, I said, all those giant flags that fly at every venue, I said, does the country provide them, or does the International Olympic Committee provide them? And he said, the country has to provide one for every venue that it's participating in, and then they have to provide actually 2 in case they win a medal, so they could, hang it up in the rafters for the anthems. And I said, what do you do with all of those flags when the Olympics are over? Do you take them back for 4 years? And they go, no, we use new ones every year. I go, well, what are you going to do with these in Atlanta? And he goes, why? Do you want one? I said, absolutely. And in my basement, hanging on my ceiling, is a flag that is 24 feet long and 12 feet wide. It was hanging in
Good
the
that you have such a big basement, Jerome.
Oh, my God. It's one of my prized possessions.
So nice to hear. I must really say we are so proud of you, first of all, as a Croatian American, American Croatian, however you want to put, but also as a great Croatian announcer, You kind of represent us here in the world of sport, as Croatians, here in America.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I take a lot of pride in it, and I have always taken a lot of pride in it.
You sure
and
have
as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a community, a very small town in western Pennsylvania. I went to Croatian Catholic Church. I went to Croatian Catholic School, grades 1 through 8. A vast majority of my childhood friends were Croatian. My relatives all attended that same church, as did a lot of my neighbors. I grew up in a Croatian community. Every Sunday in the summer, our church had a picnic ground. And one of my childhood friends, his father used to barbecue the lamb on the spit all
Janjetina,
throughout
Jerome,
Ohio and Pennsylvania and New York. So every Sunday for 3 months in the summer, the church picnic grounds, after church, we'd go up, we'd have lamb on the spit. It was fantastic. And I just thought everybody lived that way. And then, of course, I moved down here to Atlanta, which has a very small Croatian community. So you miss that part of your life, and so when you do meet someone who is also Croatian, you feel a bond with them. It's an automatic trigger
That's so true.
that takes you back to your childhood and to your family and to your relatives and who you are as a person inside. So I have a great deal of pride in being Croatian. I love when I see an athlete succeeding in regardless of the sport, like Christian Pulisic. He like me, is of Croatian background, but born here in America. And the guys I work with, I don't work with any, I used to, I didn't work with any other Croatians. So when a player like Pulisic would do really well, I'd say, you know why he's so much better than everybody else, don't you? Because he's Croatian. Oh, they would roll their eyes. And they've heard that 1,000 times if they've heard it once. It doesn't matter who the player is. And, of course, we get into the World Cup and everybody takes pride in their own country.
Sure.
And I'm still mad over that bad referee call from 4 years ago against France. I'll tell you that right now. I think we all know we got robbed of a chance to win that thing. But we'll see what Luca and the boys can do coming up here.
Coming up soon, really soon. So, Jerome, thank you so much for all these great and exciting stories you told us, you shared with us today. Is there anything else you would like to add or mention here for our listeners or your followers? Because I know that today, I guess your family or your friends from Hrvatska, they're listening to you today.
Well, I think they're all smiling right now because they are just like me.
Oh.
They take intense pride in the fact that they're a Croatian. We love the fact that we're Croatian. We almost feel like we're the underdog. So, the people I grew up with, my parents and my relatives and my community, they came to America. We have grown up with a great sense of pride in who we are, a tremendous work ethic. We're very loyal. We're just wonderful people. And when I have visited Croatia, now my third trip this past summer, I see where that comes from the people that I meet over there. I don't know these people when I go over there, whether they're working at the hotel or at a restaurant or at a gift shop, or they're just somebody you meet walking down the sidewalk or you see on the beach. They're just wonderful people, and it just fills you with pride that so many people I know who aren't Croatian always ask me, I got to go to Croatia. Tell me about Croatia. I hear nothing but wonderful things. So that gives me a great sense of pride, too, knowing that people want to go there and travel to Croatia. And on a side note, my wife and I moved into our house, I think, 7 years now. And we were here for 2 or 3 weeks, and the mailman was delivering mail. I just happened to be at the mailbox. And he goes, what kind of name is Jerenovich? I said, it's Croatian. He goes, I am Bosnian. He goes, do you know you have neighbors 2 blocks away that are also Croatian and Bosnian? I said, no. So I went up and I introduced myself. We got to know them, a really nice couple. And they're great people. And his brother-in-law owns a Croatian grocery store about 3 miles from my house.
Oh.
And it is absolutely spectacular. The wife and I go there very often. And, it's difficult to find authentic Croatian food unless you make it yourself. And my culinary skills are nowhere near that area. So it is great that we can go up there and just find food brought straight from Croatia, and they do a great job themselves with the meats and the breads. It's absolutely fantastic. Great food.
We have a couple of them here in New York as well. So even where we live, and here in this area in Astoria as well. So we definitely have to meet up in Croatia for a coffee or a kava, or Jerome, for a roast lamb or janjetina.
Oh, we had. My brother's family and sister's family came with my wife and I this past July. They had never been. And when we went over there, my cousins in Oakland, they roasted a lamb, and we ate like kings and queens. It was spectacular.
I believe that. That's always like that in Croatia. That is why we always, everybody is coming back every summer, or even more, depending if you're working or not working, so how much time you have on your hands. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this was the great Jerome Jurenovich, and now I could say our new Croatian friend. Thank you. Hvala, Jerome, one more time for being with us. I hope you certainly enjoyed this as much as we did.
Oh, I enjoyed it, and I loved meeting you a couple of weeks ago, and I hope to talk to you soon and see you in person on my next trip.
Or in Croatia. Exactly. See you in Croatia as well, right? For kava and janjetina.
Very good.
Okay, thank you, hvala i lijep pozdrav, do slušanja.
Hrvatska je prva svijeta.
So let us just stick a little bit to the sports ili ostanimo još malo u prostoru sporta, pa ćemo pročitati za vas evo još jednom ono što smo već najavili u prvom dijelu programa na hrvatskom, međutim reka sam da ću evo ga u ovom dijelu, pogotovo nakon razgovora sa Jeromom, to ja pročitati sada na engleskom. Ladies and gentlemen, can't wait for Croatia to start the 2022 World Cup. Enjoy talking and hearing about Vatreni and their World Cup chances with other Croatians. If